Good morning, good afternoon, marvelous morning, tremendous afternoon, and magnificent evening. This is Carla from the MindPlore with Carla and Friends show today. And I had a bit of a technical difficulty, but we are live now and it should be working now without a problem. Restream is doing some new things that I didn't know it was doing. Anyway, today we are talking about, tell me, about becoming or believing in our superpower, something like that. And today I have two NLP experts, Jack Austun and Bob Choat, which are good people to have when you're talking about building your superpower and how to use language in order to do it effectively. Having said that, Jeanne, I really have something to figure out. Could you please take over while I'm doing that?
Sure. Yes, we're talking about finding your superpower. And I have a couple of quotes, as usual, from a poet and young adult novel writer, Jason Reynolds. He writes, having a superpower has nothing to do with the ability to fly or jump or superhuman strength. The truest superpowers are the ones we all possess: willpower, integrity, and most importantly, courage. From Lizzie Velasquez, also an author and a motivational speaker, she writes, the truth is that there's something unique about each and every one of us. Everyone has a superpower of one kind or another. And finally, Nina Hagen, a German singer and songwriter, writes, we can change the world if we change ourselves. We just need to get a hold of the old patterns of thinking and dealing with things and start listening to our inner voices and trusting our own superpowers. I like to think we all have superpowers, but I'm going to kick it over to Jack and see what you have to say about superpowers. Yes?
Before you do that, could you give your own feelings on superpower?
Okay, I can. I actually talk a lot in my training classes about superpowers with communication. I believe that they're breathing, listening, and choosing. Breathing, because you have to breathe to live, of course, but typically we breathe up here. And the superpower comes when you take deep breaths, you ground yourself, and you move your thinking from the what we call the monkey mind, where we're worried about stress and it's fight or flight, to the more logical frontal lobe, which is more about being thoughtful and deliberate about what you say and do. Listening, because that's something most people don't do. I think it was Stephen Covey wrote that we listen to respond, we don't listen to actually hear. And so I work with executives and help them learn to listen so they actually know what their folks are saying. And it's a great team building exercise to do. So listening is something that I think is extremely powerful. And that's what real leaders do. And then finally, choosing. It's another Stephen Covey thing, between the stimulus and the response, you get to choose. And I add to it, you get to choose heaven or hell. You get to choose peace or chaos. So when we take that moment and we figure out how we're going to respond, we get to choose. Is this going to be a good conversation or is this going to be a confrontation? You know, those kinds of things are important in how we can exude our own superpower. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me. I remember teaching that distinction about the space between stimulus and response, which I believe came from Man's Search for Meaning that Stephen Covey was searching for back in the day. He had taken a sabbatical when he discovered that quote and then couldn't find the reference point to put it back to. And the reason that I bring the context up is because Viktor Frankl, the author of Man's Search for Meaning, watched his entire family be slaughtered in front of him. They were machine gunned when he was inducted into the prison camps. And most people would consider that the most horrific thing that they could ever imagine experiencing in their life. But he chose to live. He made a decision in that moment that he was going to find something about the experience that was happening that would allow him to stop it from happening again. And then he dedicated his life to the creation of logotherapy after surviving the prison camps. So it can be a very extreme stimulus. And that is probably what most people would consider, and certainly I consider, a very extreme response, because the emotional shock of seeing such a thing is, most people would consider devastating, in fact, unsurvivable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that, Jack. And in fact, Viktor Frankl's, I don't know if you're able to read his latest book that came out called Yes to Life. And in fact, I have a copy here. And he goes into discussing like embracing life, where a lot of people will make a decision to opt out of life through like suicide as an example, and being able to find that meaning, even if you don't really know what that meaning is. First, embrace life. Don't try to opt out. Go through the struggle and everything, and from that struggle is where you'll find the meaning. Don't try to like search it and search for happiness, because you'll never find true happiness by going out and searching for it. So I know that one of the basic tenets here in the United States is the pursuit of happiness. Well, that's been all wrong, and I think a lot of people who pursue it, and where our forefathers, they went through that struggle in order to help to found this country. And it wasn't about like pursuing happiness, but it was about finding meaning in terms of what they were doing. So Jack, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think our superpower can be found from the meaning that we find from what we do, through the work that we do, through the challenge that we go through, and everything like that.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
I think that's really true. I truly believe we all have a superpower, in that we're all here for a unique reason, and we sometimes get that trained out of us, if you will. It's easier to think with the crowd. It's not so easy to go against the crowd, and I understand that greatly. There are reasons to do that from time to time, and there are reasons to not do that. But finding your space, carving out your space, is a pursuit that that we all need to get comfortable with, and understand what role we want to play, not what role do we play. And that's where our superpowers come in, because they give us the strength and the focus to move beyond what's comfortable. And I'm all for comfort, but there are times where we have to show the discomfort so we can grow. And even though I'm, north of 30, okay, I'm a typical woman. I'm not sure I want to say exactly how old I am, but I'm not adverse to it, but I'm north of 30. And I've have experiences that help bring me to who I am today. And when I look back at what I would probably call the negative experiences, I had to go through them. That was kind of the firing in the kiln, like you do in ceramics. I had to go through them to get here. So when I'm talking to folks, they're going like, wow, I never thought of it that way. And like, because you didn't have to experience it. I can now share it with you, and you can look at it differently. That's a superpower. Being able to help somebody through without having to go through the negative experience, that helps. And I kind of miss that we don't have the whole elders kind of mythology that some of the indigenous and more ancient civilizations had, because we can learn so much from our elders.
Jeanne, I have to agree. And I think I'd have to look this up to be absolutely certain, but I think that process is known as proofing in ceramics. And isn't that an interesting name?
Yeah, I did not know that.
So there are so many things that we take for granted, right? There's the old saying that an older fish is swimming along and he sees two younger fish coming towards him, and he says, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" And the two younger fish look at him and say, "What's water?" Because what they've been swimming in, they have always had present, and they don't recognize it. What is so close to us, we can often miss, such as in our culture, right? We're given a lot of like Newtonian traditional education around physics, and the five senses are very critical. And then something like the sixth sense is supposed to be, an extra sensory perception thing. But my understanding is that there's been investigations to up to 23 senses, and certainly reference in the Eastern literature about the subtle senses. So we have these things, these uninvestigated characteristics about our being, just the Earth rover suit that we've been gifted. And it is not our consciousness. Our consciousness is not our five senses, from my understanding, my experience.
23 senses. That's worth exploring. Definitely worth exploring. But I understand what you're saying, because intuition isn't necessarily categorized as a sense in the way that I think you said Newtonian physics.
Well, we have an empirical bias, and there's no reason not to. I mean, certainly superstition can be a real challenge. And so we have a scientific and empirical bias in the West. And yet we also suffer from sort of self-created problems on a fairly regular basis. Like, without getting on, a pedestal, right? I remember listening to Sadhguru talking about the difference between what he considered the greatest evil in the world. And that's an empowered small mind. And the comparison that he gave, the lesson, as it were, was that Adolf Hitler, of a name that makes people shudder just to mention it, was an empowered small mind. Whereas the traditional approach in Hinduism, in the Hindu tradition, is to give a small child a mantra that connects them with all of the universe, so that they recognize that they are part of the entire universe before they get Western education and the empowerment of trying to control the external world, which would, needless to say, give a consciousness of being part of everything, a sense of a oneness with all other beings, right? There's one of the co-founders of Google Labs, a guy by the name of Tom Che, says that scientifically there's demonstrable oneness. And he said that all of the iron in the entire universe was created at the Big Bang. And we know that to be the truth. And it's also interesting that every single cell of human blood and every mammalian blood on the planet has one molecule of iron in it.
Yep.
That's,
I
that's
that's very, very true. It's something I learned during when I got my bachelor's in physics. That you mentioned physics uh, earlier. So yes, I would have to concur with that. And and if we look at like that heme molecule, which is the iron, and it's part of what gives us life, and without it, we wouldn't be able to live. Uh, I gave blood yesterday. It was my 10th donation since the beginning of the pandemic, and I realized that through my blood and through the passing of that iron, it's going to give other people life, and and the fact that I was able to do that, even in the midst of me going through my kidney stone issues, I felt that, yeah, I was giving a part of myself, the physical part of myself, in terms of helping others. Now, I want to go back to the aspect of helping others. Do uh, do we help others to the point of their detriment? I mean, can we be helping others to the point of their detriment where they don't have growth? You know, as Jack mentioned earlier regarding Viktor Frankl, because Frankl saw through the struggle that we find a meaning, but we also find a growth as well. So I want to pose that.
as a single working mother, I can tell you that is possible. It's one of the things that I talk about with my adult son from time to time, usually in the guise of kidding each other, but to make sure that he didn't go hungry on those nights when I actually needed to work a little late, I actually taught him how to cook using the microwave. He's an excellent cook now. He really likes it, and that's a skill I never really picked up. I'm not a great cook because I don't get the enjoyment, but I really love watching him cook because he truly enjoys it. I taught him how to sew. I had to teach him how to, clean up the house because I couldn't do it all. And I used to tell him that, mommy can't go to work full time and do everything. So we don't want to live in chaos. So go clean your room, and I had to find different ways throughout his various phases of growth on how to give consequences, because he was so smart, he would learn how to outsmart his mother. And so whatever consequence I gave him wasn't enough, until I hit on the golden one as he was growing older, and that was to put the PlayStation in timeout. If I took that away for 2 days, he would react. But my point is that I learned I had to teach him, and I was watching some of his friends be in awe that he could make scrambled eggs at the ripe age of 8 when they'd come to spend the night, because others don't really let their kids around the stove. But if we do everything for them, and I learned this in the helping with homework thing as well, if we do everything for them, they don't learn. And yeah, I know I kind of feel where you're coming from, because we do have this phenomenon called helicopter parenting. But in this day and age, you do need to be more of a helicopter parent, because the dangers have been exponentially growing. However, we still have to empower our kids. And so that's teaching them, that's letting them go through the struggle. And one of the lessons that I learned managing my son was finding the lesson in each struggle. What did you learn? What are you going to do next? How's this going to change how you think? And I'd like to think that made him the great young man that he is today. We didn't have an easy life by any means, but he's doing a good job raising 2 kids and having a wonderful family life. What more can a mother ask for? So I understand that, And I think more people need to let loose the reins just a little so their kids can learn the lessons.
Well, I think nature shows an example of that in sort of the classic example of the butterfly being strengthened by breaking free of the chrysalis by itself, and people seeing the struggle, wanting to assist it, help it out. And it actually builds the muscles it needs in its wings and its superstructure bodily to be able to hold itself up and to be able to make its first flight through the breaking out of the chrysalis. And, there's a bit of a joke because that metaphor certainly symbolizes, or certainly has for me, transformation. But just prior to that, right, everybody wants the butterfly and nobody wants the caterpillar soup.
That's true.
Yeah.
That complete liquefaction of everything we once knew. And in a sense, the caterpillar is the ultimate consumer, consuming twice its body weight in food, often in a day, until it becomes so large that its body creates this trigger effect, which begins that metamorphosis. Interesting lesson.
Yeah. Now, does the caterpillar recognize its superpower to do that?
No, but it's interesting that scientists have used the term imaginal cells to describe what it is that creates the opportunity to switch so dramatically from one shape to another.
Imaginal cells.
Those imaginal cells, they know what to do to make an entirely different creature, and the incipient potential has been waiting in the caterpillar all along.
So to kind of use that as a metaphor, we have our own imaginal cells. We need to.
Indeed, we do.
And we need to let them loose. I mean,
well, I think it's focusing them, and I think Einstein talked about the greatest superpower for humanity. He found that compounding interest was a phenomenal event, but that imagination was more powerful than our capacity for analysis or intellectual process.
Yep. I fully agree. In fact, that right there, and Jack, I'm glad you brought that up. Imagination is part of the catalyst, and I would even add curiosity for ourselves in the exploration. Imagination is the catalyst towards our superpower, to be able to create it, whatever that superpower ultimately becomes. And I would like to put it in the terms of context, because we've all gone through stages in our life, and we may have had a superpower when we're younger, and then we get to different stages and we discover a whole new superpower that we did not know that we have. And I know that with me, a lot of things I did when I was younger, and always I always thought my superpower when I was younger was being a savior. And I realized that when I went out there to try to save people and rescue more on a physical basis, because I would be the kind of person who would step in and do the whole self-defense kind of thing, as a Marine in the Marine Corps, as a Los Angeles police officer, and being in a martial arts my whole life. So I was doing that kind of stuff early in my life till I discovered that it wasn't helping anybody. And I thought that was my superpower, was to go and save people. And that's the reason I posed a question earlier regarding, having people going through their own struggles. And I wasn't allowing these people do it until I started teaching women's self-defense. So I used my superpower to teach others. And as Jeanne, you talked about teaching in terms of that element, like you did with your son, I had to do that with women when I taught women's self-defense too, so they can save their own selves when the time came. But I would like to know from each and every one of you is that how has your own superpowers changed throughout each area, each period of your life, and has it strengthened earlier ones? Have you discarded earlier ones? Things like that, like I have.
Well, I certainly have an answer for that for me. And it's been a migration because my perception as a child was that in order to survive in my family, I had to please people because I wouldn't get the attention. I wouldn't get the encouragement that I desired. I wouldn't even be accepted if I didn't. And I don't know that is a verifiably accurate perception. It was a child's perception. Both my parents were functional alcoholics, so there were challenges. They had unresolved issues. Who doesn't? But that was part of the experience. So I felt as though I was being a persona. I had to behave as someone that I didn't feel I was, and there was a huge rebel streak in me. So I'd get really upset when things didn't go my way, or I wasn't even allowed to have my self-expression. And my dad's house rule was no unpleasantness. So he wanted a home that he felt safe in and comfortable and was going to have relaxation in when he got home from work, which I certainly understand now. But young children don't get that. they're growing, they're discovering, they're trying to figure stuff out. So initially, I thought I had to prove myself through intellect. I had to prove myself through a variety of different approaches. And what I've discovered is that the real superpower that I found was vulnerability, the willingness and the ability to actually share connectedly with people rather than putting on that very persona, because it kept people from knowing me. And it kept them from expressing themselves.
I grew up in a family similar to that, add in military to that. So my dad was into command and control. And when I first got into my own apartment, and it was like, whoo, everything was taken off. I was a young adult in my early 20s, and I could do whatever I want. And you realize there's a reason for the limitations. It's not too often that you can stay up till 4 a.m. and get up at 6 o'clock to go to work the next morning. Although I do remember those being fun times. But you can't do that on a sustained basis. So I really went into work and loved that I could do the work that I was doing. And I turned myself into a workaholic because I loved it so much. And as I grew older and more mature in my work, as well as in life, I started focusing on balance. And what I found was I didn't allow myself to express who I was because that wasn't safe. So even when I thought I was in a better place as an adult, I still had some issues that I didn't even recognize about being me. So I jokingly say, if you want an article written, I'm here to help you because I can get it done like that, if it's for you and in your words. But the minute I need to do something about me, from my perspective, I go, "Ugh," and it's like nobody wants to hear. Well, that goes all the way back to being told as a 3 and 4-year-old, nobody wants to hear you. That whole children are supposed to be seen and not heard kind of thing, which would come up because, okay, we had 7 children in the family. It would get a little chaotic, so I'm not faulting my parents for saying that, because as a parent now, I understand where they might have been coming from, but the child perception of that you hold on to. And it took some real work on my end to recognize that I can stand up and say what I think. And that's when I started talking about communications and the importance of communications and being aware of what you say, how you say it, and how your audience person, the person you're talking to, whether it's a big audience or one, how they take it, because they're taking it from their perspective. And when you start to understand perspectives and perceptions, your communications can become much clearer. So all of those things went into how I end up, coaching people and talking to people so that they can grow. You don't need to go through the same, gauntlet that we each went through, but we all come out with lessons. And my lesson came when I was talking with people. I was actually driving a couple of people to a Toastmasters meeting, and an offhanded comment came out of my mouth. It was like, man, nobody really wants to hear what I have to say. And the woman sitting next to me stopped the conversation. She goes, no, actually, there are two people in the car here who want to know what you have to say. And that was kind of mind-blowing in the sense that I don't know if I ever heard that before. And it made me think differently. And that's how we go through our own metamorphosis. We start to think differently. Carla, how about you?
Today isn't the great best day to ask me that because I'm looking for my superpower right now. But it is changing your thinking. We all have been taught to think in a certain way or see things in a certain way. And that may be true for the person saying it to us, but it may not be true for the person you are. Because we're all unique beings. And because we are all unique beings, we have a right to live our lives in the way we feel is appropriate. And we find our superpowers by finding the things that we do that make us happy, that calm us down, that keep us going. And someone may say, why do you do that show, or why do you do that? It's because that is not their superpower. It's far from how they think. And until we begin to think for ourselves and not for someone else, do we begin to open up who we really are. And that's my 2 bits for this.
It's a powerful 2 bits. See, my dad used to say 2 bits and a cup of coffee, and you have a great meeting. I think part of what we have to do is balance what we've been taught, because what we're being taught is how to show up and be with other people and discuss things and move things along and work together and have a society. But we need to have a society, but we need to be strong in who we are as well, because the gifts that we are innately born with need to come out. It's one of the reasons I like to talk about the power of listening, because we can find other people's gifts when we truly listen to them, versus listening to say, oh, what am I going to say? I have a visual of people having a Rolodex. And for those of you who are under 30, that's a paper-based filing system, but you're flipping through the Rolodex in your mind going, what can I say? What can I say? What can I say? I want to sound smart. I want to sound smart. I want to sound smart. And you completely miss the second half of whatever they're saying, because you're too busy. Your mind is focused on what you're going to say next. And in those, it's kind of like the Marvel universe when you're watching the movies. And if you're not aware of this, you watch the movies, you get to the credits and people get up to leave, but they always have kind of a preview of the next movie coming in at the end. So you get this prophetic clip. And my son had to tell me to sit down and wait one time. I didn't know. And I took him to all the Marvel movies because, of course, that I knew that was one we could look at together. And he goes, no, Mom, wait. And we waited, and lo and behold, it's like a whole other little mini movie. It might only be 3 minutes, but it usually tells you something so that you're going like, I can't wait for the next one. And that's what listening does. When you're listening to somebody, the big kaboom comes at the end of what they're saying, not necessarily at the beginning. So we have to listen and find those gifts in listening. Bob, you're shaking your head.
Yeah, I fully agree. And interestingly, you brought up the Marvel movies, because I just recently watched on on Disney Plus, the Eternals, and each one of the Eternals, they're going through their own struggles, and I don't want to give away the movie if you haven't watched it on Disney Plus yet, but each one has their own special superpower. But they also have their own struggles, their own story that they thought the story of who they were turned out not to be the truth at the end. So if you ever get a chance, watch the Eternals, and you'll discover, and then they leave you hanging at the end, and things like that. I think it's like each one of us, we have to look into our own story, and as Jack was talking about earlier, especially with his life of who he thought he was supposed to be, what he grew up as a child, and then and Jeannie, as you talked about, like as we're going through life, and the same thing, who are we really? And we need to go back to that essence. And as Carl Jung talked about, that the persona and the shadow self, and discovering that shadow that we trying to keep hidden. And I know I've gone through that, but as we're walking through the world, and we constantly tell a story based on a mask that we're wearing around for others to see. Is that who we really are? When we wear this mask, we're not unleashing that superpower of who we are. And as they were talking about in Internals, I think each one realized that to find their true story, or even create that true story in itself, because our personal narrative constantly changes and such. And I'm just wondering, like with me, because I think Jack said the same thing, is that he changed later on, and I had done the same thing, and I eventually, I think I'm at that point in life where I'm now uncovering that true superpower that I thought I had one way, and that shifted because I had to take this mask off of being this powerful, strong kind of person. That was a mask. That wasn't who I really was. So your thoughts on that?
I think that there's a second lesson in the Eternals that adds to it, and it kind of fits with what you're finding out, as we would say, later in life. And that's that they found that they were stronger working together. When it comes to the big kaboom, you see them start to figure out how to really work together. And that's the balance that I think we need to find in our daily lives. There's a balance between what we have to be when we're at work, what we have to be when we're home with our loved ones, what we have to be out in the world. And sometimes it means throwing a bunch of balls in the air and juggling. And I think most of us are aware of that, because that's that crazy busy world we live in. In fact, it wasn't too long ago, I was talking with a friend who was saying all the things that she had to do. And I finally said, what is it that you want to do? Yeah. And she was like, nobody's ever asked me that before. Because we get so busy that we forget to look a little further out. I might say, I have 12 things to do today. I'm going to be busy, busy, busy. But if I can think about, I'm working towards this project, and 3 of those things move me forward, that's going to change how I perceive that. And I'm actually getting ready to put together a talk about the second quadrant in Stephen Covey 4 quadrants, those things that are not critical time-wise, but important, because those are the things that usually get ignored. You know, they're the big projects that we don't always break up. And those are projects that are in your work life, in your home life, in your love life, you know, whatever life you're living. So it's kind of taking that more strategic look of, you know, what do you need to be putting your resources towards? And part of our superpowers needs to be discernment. How do you pick and choose where you put your resources? You know, and by resources, I mean your time, your effort, your love. You know, how many of us have toxic friends, you know, that draw us down? You know, maybe we need to rethink that relationship and find a different way to work. You know, those are all superpowers. Letting ourselves come out is a superpower. And I love that you started out with Newtonian physics, Jack, because I think there's a balance with science and logic and with intuition and creativity. You know, and when we look at them, it could be very, very powerful.
What occurs to me in what you were just saying there, Jeanne, was I believe the world is much weirder than we think it is. And I would give as an example, quantum mechanics. Okay. Very difficult to understand for people outside of physics. In fact, very difficult to even get general concepts. But there's an old meaning in that word weird. We use it very commonly, but what are we using it for? Often I think most people are just saying, well, it's odd or peculiar. And the old meaning in the Old English is destiny. So
okay, that's interesting.
So what ends up happening, I think, in part of it, you know, we were talking about Einstein and the power of imagination, creativity, for example, and Joe Dispenza, right, the chiropractor, philosopher, neuroscientist, wrote a book called We Are the Placebo. And the implication of We Are the Placebo is belief, or his buddy, Bruce Lipton, The Biology of Belief, talks about epigenetics and the impacts of the effects of the consciousness that we have, the belief systems that operate within us. What we believe to be true, we will live as though it was true, right? And Tony Robbins, in his sort of introductory live event, Unleash the Power Within, has a whole talk about pointing the bone from voodoo and how impactful that is in a belief system of a tribal environment where the witch doctor is supposed to have a very specific set of powers and power over the unknown and the unseen world of darkness, and how people drop dead within an hour of when they're told that would happen if they have the bone pointed at them and they're cursed, because they actually believe in that power, and then it occurs. Well, people also believe that stress is a real thing, and that we have this statistic that there are more heart attacks between the hours of 9 a.m. and 11 on Mondays than at any other time during the week. Now, isn't that an interesting perception to carry into one's work, where theoretically a person is capable of creating value in the world, but because the perception is it's so scary and daunting and overwhelming, it takes us out.
Are those thoughts that you think we have right at the front of our mind, or are those thoughts that Deepak Chopra talks about that keep flipping through, but we're not even aware of them, because it's like 80% of our thoughts we're not even aware of?
Well, I mean, I don't know that up until recently in certain circles, the conversation has been really held about what you also brought up earlier in reference to fight or flight, right? The parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system, right? I mean, as an NLP certified person. Ericksonian hypnosis was one of the things I was certified in. I have also done clinical certification in hypnosis. And part of the teaching there is the critical importance of rest and relaxation, right? It's something that we really need. And yet, because of the wiring of our brain and because of the capacity we have to crush that space where there's choice to respond, to reflex, we end up creating beliefs about things that are not true. In other words, that the person who was driving in front of me did something to me on purpose. And I can assure you they're not looking in their rearview mirror thinking of a different way to do that, like 99.9% of the time, right? They may have spilled their coffee cup. They may have gotten bad news. They may be distracted. They may be having some challenge of their own, but the likelihood that they're actually doing something to harm me is ridiculous in truth. But we have something called road rage, and people believe that it's a syndrome. There's a whole syndrome of road rage, but road rage is the inability to have that distance between stimulus and response, and to think they're probably having as challenging a morning as I am. But instead, it's to blame another based on a collapsing of space and a perception that everything happens because of me, instead of there being a million souls on that roadway, each having their own individual experience and every single one having a different experience.
Yes, I completely agree. Well, that's one of the reasons, like when I'm driving on the freeways here and I see somebody that may cut in front of me suddenly, I'll reframe it. And I get to a point thinking, this person can be like, maybe they got a call and their loved one has been in an accident. They may be in a hospital. Something's going on with this person. The reason why they had to suddenly cut in front of me like that, or it's certain other things. So I've learned to reframe that. And the same thing, I think, reframing ourselves as well, and challenging certain beliefs about who we are. I don't know if you read a study that Dr. Ellen Langer did back in 1979, where she took two groups of elderly gentlemen. They were in their late 70s and 80s, and they brought them to a monastery where they stayed for a week. So they had a control group and an experimental group. So the control group were brought back to an environment, and this is supposed to be like 20 years later, but they had the same clothes from 1979. And so there were changes in both groups. The experimental group went back, and their clothes, everything, what was playing on the radio, on TV, newspapers, magazines, the change in their pocket was as if they were from the 1950s. And so the control group had physical changes because they measured the changes before and after. They did blood workup, everything, height, weight, all the different issues. So the control group was as if they went on a vacation. So they had changes. Just like if we go on a vacation, we change our environment, we start to feel better. The experimental group, they had a complete mind shift. They went back as if it was that period of time. And all the physiological changes took place. They reversed aged based on that. And it stayed with them for 6 months later. They measured them. So some men that they grew taller, their arthritis went away, their blood pressure went down. Every single marker of being 70s and 80s went back and completely reversed. So if we can just reframe ourselves to that, I know that when we think about, or when we listen to music being played from our childhood, we start to move around as if we were younger. It's the same thing. We can have that shift, but we can have in terms of changing that. And again, I challenge my own self. And And as I said earlier in earlier discussions, I've been doing parkour, and parkour is usually a young person's game. And I've been doing that for almost 14 years now.
Wow.
Yeah. So here I am in my 7th decade and just enjoying it. Actually going to my 8th decade, I believe. I don't know, something like that. So I go around because I have that kind of shift that I can do this kind of stuff. I don't say that I'm this old man, I'm supposed to act a certain way, you know, and really old like boys. No, I'm just going to go out there and challenge myself, having that same kind of feeling. So,
Well, you know, and Bob, what you're saying, I mean, my understanding from, you know, reading Bruce Lipton is that, and listening to Deepak Chopra, for example, is that one of the common beliefs in our society is that genetic illness is a regular thing, right? And it's genetic determinism. The exact opposite of what Bruce Lipton's work proved in the laboratory, starting with stem cells in the 1970s. But it's still known as the dogma in medicine,
correct.
Even though there's a growing mind-body, you know, body of work because of curiosity and lack of satisfaction with the existing model by more practitioners than in the past. But nonetheless, that this characteristic is that the telomeres, which are the genetic encoded part of the body that basically are duplicated repetitively by the proteins throughout age, progressively get degenerated, not unlike a photocopy, right? Second generation, third generation, fourth generation, less sharp, less clear, and then fraying at the edges and so forth. But for people who live in gratitude and who are looking forward to what's happening in their life and who are actively engaged, there's perfect duplication in their 80s, just like they were in their 20s. That's the difference of hope and engagement and creativity in life. The sense of gratitude and looking forward to things actually creates a healthier bio environment for us to recreate ourselves accurately, right? And perhaps inaccurately in the sense of exceptionally younger than our than our biographical age, right? Our physical age. And that's a fascinating capacity that we have innately that is a completely missed superpower that all people share as a capacity that they can make a shift and change towards a different direction in an instant and then have that impact their entire system. I mean, I remember an interview with Deepak Chopra by Tony Robbins done in the 90s for a thing he did called the Power Talks, and now it's available on YouTube for free as part of a podcasting thing. And he basically talked about this factor of what's called chronic illness. And how is it that if we change out all cell structure minimum every 7 years and stomach linings every 3 months, or all these different shiftings of the biology of the body, and this is done so frequently, how is it that we can have chronic illness? How is it that the body remembers to be arthritic or to have an autoimmune disease? If it's always being shifted out, how is that done? And the argument was genetic, and it's not.
Well, it goes to the power of programming.
Absolutely.
You know, when we program a computer and then you just restart the computer, you have the same program running versus changing the programming and then all of a sudden the user interface changes and you have to learn new things. And, you know, it's easier to just let the old program run. So that's part of the can't think of the word I want, but it's part of the way that we're brought up to go the path of least resistance. Hence, the poem of the
Yeah, well,
road less traveled, makes a big difference.
There's imprinting that occurs not unlike other animals, right? Like our
Yeah.
subconscious mind is open and doesn't have the so-called critical factor up until the age of approximately 5 or 6. So subconsciously, we're taking everything in, and we don't know if there's a right or a more effective way to do things. And then we have this conglomerate of what used to be called either subconscious, sometimes unconscious, now apparently non-conscious information.
Excuse me.
Carla?
You're giving us really wonderful information, and I really appreciate it. However, we've come to the end of the show, and we need to begin to slow down and say our last final words. And I appreciate everything you're saying. Please don't take it as a cutoff, but I need to cut you off from this train going forward very quickly to a very short train, because the train is about to end. So if you want to say it in a few short words, I'd be happy to have you say it. And I'm sorry to cut you off. Jack?
So how would you
I said what I
summarize it?
needed to say.
Okay. If there's a summary sentence, Jack, what would it be?
I think that we overlook our capacities because we have been trained, often culturally, to be unaware. And so awareness is a superpower. And
Excellent.
the social hypnosis is actually conditioning.
Thank you. Bob?
Yeah, I think being able to look at the narrative that we've been telling ourselves that have maybe stopped us from unleashing our superpower, we have the ability to change that, to allow it to unleash our true selves and to grow from that and become the super person that we were always meant to be.
And I'd like to just remind people that we're here to do something unique. We just need to allow our uniqueness to shine through. And that means doing exactly what both of you guys have said, find the power of awareness and, being aware of our inner voices and trusting our own abilities. Those are superpowers. Carla, how about you?
Thank you for bringing me back here. I think that what you said kind of sums it all up. Our superpowers are what comes out, what makes us happy. And we forget, we think we have to work and make life a struggle. Whereas what we have in our dreams are our reality, and we need to live by our dreams. Would you agree?
Yes.
I would agree.
Yep.
Thank you. And with that, and Jeanne, you'll probably want to add to this, we will be back on Thursday with a very interesting panel like today. We'll have Jeff Culver, Cameron, and Neville all on one stage. It means we're going to have a lot of work to do, but it shall be wonderful. And is there anything I'm forgetting, Jeanne?
Well, I want to ask people to go to our YouTube channel, which is Giggle University, and like the show, comment if you have a comment, and share it out to everybody in your network so that we can reach more people with the show that we're doing. And also, I'd like to remind everyone that Carla has a Patreon page. It's called The Giggle Lady on Patreon. And if you feel so driven to help support the work that Carla's doing, both with MindPlore and with the Learning English by Speaking English show. Please think about donating. She has a raffle going on right now for everybody who gives $5 or more. Their name goes into a hat, and she gives out once a week a 30-minute session with Carla online, which is very powerful. If you've ever seen her interviews with some very, very influential people from around the world. So just, like, again, when you see us on Facebook or YouTube or LinkedIn or Twitter, please like, share, and help us get the word out.
And please understand that YouTube is doing a very strange thing for me. They have restricted my posts to be less influential for some unknown reason. So
YouTube or Facebook?
Facebook. And your help by sharing this out is very much appreciated, because my posts are on the low end of priority right now, and we have no idea why, but it is what it is. And with this, let us wave goodbye, and we will be back again on Thursday with more about superpowers.